Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. What it's like to see a Manbeast in the UK. This is Tracy Neal's experience, part 2. Last week I shared an experience with you all that happened to a couple when they were out walking in the Forest of Dean and were confronted by a terrifying Manbeast. As Tracy and her husband were new to the area, the exact location in the forest is still something we're trying to pin down. Luckily, the witness has provided me with some information that you may recognise about the area and we might be able to hone in a little better. Thanks to Mike Wright, we think it could possibly be the forest that's around Tinton Abbey. The creature Tracy saw watched them as they hiked the trails, kissing and embracing every now and then, as lovers do. And after hearing 2 awful growls, they were chased from the forest by what Tracy described as a Manbeast. Tracy described the creature she saw that day as a black shape that was crouched down by a big tree, and we just walked past it. My brain was just not registering what my eyes were seeing. It was, well, I don't know what it was. If I can, I would compare it to a huge, massive man crouched down on the balls of his feet, with one hand resting on the earth in front of him, and one leaning upon the tree. That's as close as I could get in describing him. That's the shape I saw. But I couldn't see his face, just a head shape, as if it was looking at the floor. We couldn't get out of there quick enough, and all the way out I knew it was following us. I kept looking back over my shoulder, and that's when I saw it again, and more clearly this time. The crouched dark shape was the same. I just stared. I tried to focus my eyes. What the hell was that? It shuffled, still crouched as it approached nearer to the edge, the way that I'd turned. I was still screwing my face up, trying to make out what it was. I needed to. I needed to understand. All of this took just seconds to happen. But you know that feeling you get, as if time itself slows down? That's what it felt like in that instant. Like everything went into slow motion. But my senses felt heightened. It was moving slowly now, and I could see it was raising itself up. I could see it. I could smell the earth, and I could smell the leaves stronger than before. I can still smell it now. I didn't need to squint. I could see it clearly, raising itself up to standing position. This huge, looming, dark shape now stood like a man. A very huge man. I could make out huge thigh muscles, a narrower waist, and a massive, broad chest. I'm sure my mouth fell open. It was there. Yet although I could see it, some details were partially obscured by the sunlight behind it as I looked up. I was entranced by it. It was beautiful, yet scary as hell. It looked at me. It actually lowered its head and held eye contact. It was the weirdest feeling in the world. I was in total awe. I was like, wow, I didn't feel intense fear. Weird. I was just amazed and stunned at the sight of him, I guess. I can't really explain it. I stared at this being, trying to take it all in. I felt as if I wanted to go and touch it. You know, I'm an idiot. Maybe it was to see if I could. I've no bloody idea why I thought that, lol. It's ludicrous now to think about it. But I definitely wanted to reach up my hand and touch it. I've taken reports like this from all across the UK and worldwide, and the witness in those cases often describes the way the creature was crouched and watching, and when it had their full attention, it raised up to its full height. They talk about the silhouette being almost human-like, with a thin waist tapering up towards a huge expanse of chest and shoulders. That's what I saw. Our witness Tracy also described the way the creature kept the sun behind it, so its face was in shadow most of the time. This is a battle strategy. used by warring tribes and armies for millennia. Always keep the sun in your enemy's eyes and take up a position raised above them. This gives you an advantage in an attack situation or an ambush. And there is always a ridge or an embankment or a hill that they can disappear over as you approach. In the same way, a hunter sits high up to stalk a deer, as a mountain lion does to stalk its prey. Thankfully, the couple made it back to safety of the car, but the encounter has stayed heavily imprinted on Tracy's mind. When I heard her story and explored what she loved as a child, I realised, like me and many others, Tracy is closely connected to nature. She feels it calling, and she can get a pining to be out there that is hard to describe. Given the choice, I'd be living in a small cottage in the woods, rarely visited by tourists and passers-by. I'd be left to my own devices, and I could moonbathe, walk and talk to the trees as I passed them, having long conversations with the animals, watching how they access a resource or avoid others, kissing my husband in a natural way, as we humans should, and always have, since the dawn of time. I used to see this as a weirdness in me, longing for things hundreds of years ago, whilst living in a central city with every immunity you need. But with all of my problems, it was a nightmare. Society tells me I should just accept it, stamp myself as odd, I give in and dim myself down and fit in. All of my diagnoses over the years did not cure me of this, all my longings, and running away was never an option for me. Now I know this is a genetic longing. I understand it now. And I'm not weird. I'm not ill. I'm not sick in the head or crazy. Like Tracy, and some of you guys, I simply long for solitude and peace as I move alongside nature, never battling her as I learn the rhythm of the area I'm in. Travellers and nomads know each place has a dance all of its own that you have to learn, and you are always late to the party. But if you wait around or visit enough, the partygoers invite you in, and you're soon up to speed. Me and many of you fit that environment. Our souls remember it, and we yearn for it. But it can also bring with it confusion, along with hundreds of questions, and some encounters are just too close to our families for comfort. Now things are happening to Tracy closer to home, much closer than we at first realised. We chatted back and forth about our experiences, and I had some questions about any possible earlier events that may be connected, and the fact that she is still having what I believe to be ongoing interactions. I had a couple of questions for Tracy, and I asked her, how old were you when you first experienced something strange? Have there been different kinds of activity happening over the years for you? What's your gut telling you about him and why you saw him? And do you get the feeling that he's connected to the land there? Tracy replied, thank you so much for getting back to me, Deb, and explaining everything. Your words were just the balm I needed. I'm sorry for the delay in replying, but we had a very weird incident happen at home. Plus, I wanted to really process the information you sent across to me and say thank you so much. You've really made me feel empowered by your own experiences and what you shared with me. And I don't think you know what a wonderful healing effect you have on us confused souls. I'm eternally grateful. You mentioned, Deb, that I may be an animal healer, and that made me giggle. My Auntie Dot was the real animal healer in the family. People say I'm a twin, family joke. She set up the Swan Sanctuary. Sadly, she's walked on from this plane of existence, bless her. But my cousin and her family now hold the fort. I could never do what they do. They are utterly amazing and dedicated. I think that you mentioned it as it brought me such wonderful happy memories to lift my spirits. Although I am that weirdo who's obsessed with nature, wildlife, flora and fauna, and I always will be. I don't know the exact place we were walking in the day. We got off track, but I do know the general location. We travelled across the Severn Bridge, and then we turned upwards and followed the River Wye. We were somewhere near an abbey, which I can't remember the name of now, but we were in the southern part of the Forest of Dean. Does that help at all? It was the first and last time I went there, and I don't think I could be paid enough to go back. Before I go into the questions you ask, can I just share with you what's happened here? This is super weird, and well, I just don't know what to think of it all. So after I emailed with you and we chatted, obviously I was thinking quite a lot about what had happened, milling it over, trying to work it all out. I'm sure you know what I mean. Well, I asked my husband, the poor bloke, if we would go for a drive out into the woods. I wanted to be in the woods and think through things, so we took a flask of coffee with us. As we went and ended up not too far away, we were in Northamptonshire, and it has loads of little treasures. And we visit lots of different places. You know, I look for a new place and just enjoy the drive and the search. Anyway, we found a pulling spot off a country lane, and I got out and started looking at the plants. Yeah, to some that might sound silly, but I like to identify them, see what's early flowering or late. It's like looking for little clues as to what's going on. For example, certain bugs thriving, you know, birds nesting, what's made a new den or what tracks are out there. Old habits die hard. And then I look up and I try to really see the tree leaves. I have a habit of peering at the real colouring. I mean, we think leaves are green, etc. But I like to switch off my brain's override and see with fresh eyes, looking at all of the hues and sparkles. I think it may be because I love art. It took me a long time to realise other folk don't tend to look at these things the way I do often. Anyways, I spotted a little hawthorn and I said to my husband, look, it's late flowering. We'll get some heat and then rain soon enough. He's used to me waffling. Just then I heard a birch snap and I looked up to see a wee shadow moving the tree line. Nothing spooky, just some creature. My husband's like, it's a goat. It wasn't. Of course, I started laughing, saying it's not a goat, it's bright red. We stood there a while, and then I decided to call it over. I was convinced it was a fox. So I quietly said, hey, come and show yourself. I just want to see you. I mean you no harm. My husband's now panicking, like, no, don't call. It's a goat. It'll attack. Which had me laughing again. I said, well, if it's a goat, it won't attack. I'll prove it. It's just some wee critter, and it did come out the tree line. But I still couldn't make it out fully. Damn, my fault for not bringing me glasses. My husband is by now going back to the car saying, it's a goat, don't you dare call it over. So of course I did. It moved like zigzag from one tree to the other. It wasn't a goat. It got closer but kept changing shape. But it stayed red. The sun was shining on its fur. It was very pretty. It seemed shy and wary, so I just stood still and quiet. It warily came closer. It sort of looked like a fox, but was bigger and bulky. It was close enough to the other side of the hedge that I could see it now, without need for my glasses. But it had features that weren't quite right. It was too bulkily built, not in a pregnant way either, as in it had large limbs and a large chest. Its face wasn't as snouty as a fox. Do you know what I mean? And the usual white that should be in certain areas with the fox wasn't there. Its eyes looked nervous at me. I said softly, well, aren't you a beauty? And it seemed to encourage it. It was at that point maybe 6 feet away. It was gorgeous. And I have a thing for foxes. I have a big tattoo of one. But it was not a fox. I've been around foxes and their smell. It sniffed the air, kind of crept cautiously a little nearer, and I was bubbling with excitement. It was so pretty. And my husband then opens the car door and yells, get in the car now or I'm leaving you. Don't you dare bring it in here with you. At this, the creature raised its head to look back towards the noise, and then it legged it. Oh, I was a bit sad at this, but I went and got back in the car anyway. We sat there, poured a coffee, and I said that was definitely not a goat. My husband said, well, the fox, goat, deer thing would have attacked whatever it was. It needs to stay there. When will you stop encouraging these weird things? So, of course, my response was to laugh. We sat laughing in the safety of the car. My husband randomly said, "Remember that bear?" I was a bit like, "Oh, that's odd." I just said, "Yeah. What do you think that was?" His answer was, "I think it was a man in a costume trying to scare us." I thought about that for a while, and then I said, "Did you see it then?" And he replied, No, I didn't see anything," and got a bit animated and started the car up. Obviously, he wanted us to go. As we drove away, I cautiously asked, "Do you think a man could make that kind of noise?" He was silent for a bit and then said no, quietly. After another pause, I asked, "What do you really think it was?" And he said he didn't know. He didn't want to know, and to stop talking about it, as it encourages it, which I thought was really weird. But he seemed scared. I tried to lighten the mood as we drove home, and I reminded him how I'd screamed and ran so fast my legs wobbled. Well, we both laughed about how ridiculous I looked, and how it's the only time he's ever seen me scared. So that's the first part. And okay, that's not weird, really. I thought it was lovely. And as you know, I've always seen unusual things, and that experience didn't faze me. I just accepted it. I don't know what it was, but it was a gentle critter. It was more scared of us. It just looked unusual. But the next part, well, that gave me the creeps. So it's 2 days later. My husband and I are sitting outside with Lily, my daughter, also known as Lilith Deb. But that's a whole new story. Then he goes and mentions the bear being what we saw. He was laughing, so the previous days going on were not worrying him. And then I joked back, "Well, at least I didn't bring the goat, fox, deer home with us." Lils asked, "What on earth were you on about?" So I filled her in, and we all had a giggle. Then she asked if I remembered the thing in our garden that she and her older sister had seen too. Then that led on to other things we'd seen and how we didn't know what they were. But then it was late, everyone went to bed. I stayed in the garden a little longer, just to ponder these things really, before finally going to bed myself. I had a bit of a weird night, and I came downstairs around 3 a.m. because of it. Lil's bedroom is downstairs, and I was surprised to find her up. We made a hot drink and sat outside. We soon ran in when we heard a growl. I don't know what it was, but we didn't want to investigate at that time of night. So inside, we peered through the kitchen window. But we were giggling as we were such wimps. We couldn't see anything. Then Lils went into her room and called me in as she wanted to show me what she'd been doing. She'd been organising and sorting through things as she cleaned up her room. And as we stood there, me looking around saying, "Good job, it looks nice," I noticed the back door. She has one in her room that leads to an enclosed alleyway. I said, "What's that mess on the glass?" I ran my hand over it, but it wasn't on the inside. It was outside. It's weird, because the alley's gated, and we have huge tall gates enclosed by fencing on either side of the alley. No one could go down there. She was like, "No," when she saw it, and she said, "Mum, I thought I was dreaming about something being at the door, wanting to get in, and that's why I'm up at this time." Weirdly, my sleep that night was off, and I dreamt something was at my window. I'd taken a photo of the marks on the door just to prove to myself we didn't imagine it. There's 3 claw drag marks at different points on the glass, on what looks like a head mark. I should note the door is high up as the alleyway has steps down into it. It looks as if something was bending down to try and look in the room. Knowing the height of the window, I know it must have been tall. I went outside to check the gates and they were locked. Nothing seemed amiss in the alley. Strange. Any thoughts? I've included the photo for you, as I think you'd like to see it. Before we hear more of Tracy's experiences, I would like to touch on some points raised. Now, Tracy's an artist who loves immersing herself in nature. She's an old soul who was made to wander the woodlands. She will have inherited this from her forefathers, as will the children. When she's stressed, frustrated, and needs to think things through, it's nature that soothes that for her. Like me and many of you, she spends as much time in nature as our modern lives allow. I noticed when she talked about the leaves and how each individual leaf has its own colour. Dare I say, each one is unique to the next. Each blade of grass, flower, root, stem, blossom, or petal has a beauty all of its own. Like the moss rose, many things are overlooked and not seen when we walk through an area at a modern pace. But if you slow down and really look, you'll see things you've never noticed before. I still fill my dad's flask with coffee and take off up to the hills or to the moors. Mark and I come to life in the woods, and when we're up top, it soothes us. I can see so far down into the valley, out to the coast and across to Wales. It puts things in perspective for me. I've heard and seen owls a million times, but I still get excited when I see another one. It slows down my manicness. It also strips me of the labels 21st century society has placed on me. I don't feel like a misfit up there. I don't feel like I need to explain my weirdness to people in the hopes of them seeing through it and really seeing me. So I understand why our witness feels the same. The creature Tracy saw that was not a fox is one I've heard of from other witnesses. The sentence usually goes, it wasn't a fox, but like one, but it was too thickly muscled and seemed off somehow. Or it didn't act or look like a fox, but what else could it have been? I've worked on many cases like Tracy's, so much so I had some initial confusion in this case. In the same month, I'd received a report from another lady who shared her experiences in Italy and on Exmoor with me. Tracy and this lady are so alike, I mixed them up at first. Their energy was exactly the same. I've had situations before when I've mixed energy up, but this was far stronger, almost as if they were one in the same, or twins who've never met. You hear of those cases, don't you? Where people meet a long lost twin and find they live the same life, have the same job, interests and hobbies, and many other serendipities. Now, with the strange marks on the glass appearing recently and the increasing activity, this case just gets stranger as we hear more of what happened in the past and recently with the family. Let's pick up where Tracy answers the questions I had and explains more in depth about her past. Tracy said, in relation to your questions, Deb, you asked how old I was when I first experienced something strange. Well, that's easy. I was in my pram, and it was before I could walk, so I must have been very young. I remember lots of strange things from being little. My mum always thought I was a little magnet for weird things. Here's something funny. My mum was due to have me on Halloween, but she was adamant that she wouldn't give birth on that day, and she didn't want another witch in the family. Her words, not mine. She was so adamant she went to the hospital before my due date and made the doctors induce her. Well, it always made me laugh, as I'd tease her about it and say, well, that didn't work out as you hoped, did it? That's my mum, bless her. She said, when I was a baby, the only way I'd settle down was if I was outside. And instead of a comforter or a toy, I'd have a leaf or a stick to play with, which I still find funny. I'd scream blue murder, she said, until I had a leaf in my chubby mitt, and I'd babble away to it. But I do remember leaves as having a sparkliness to them, and the colours kind of moved. When I was of toddler age, with legs that could move where I wanted, I was a right handful. I'd often disappear, causing my mum heart failure, only to be found up a tree. I don't know how I got up that high, but it often involved ladders to get me down again. I'd run off to the woods and just sit up trees, watching the world go by. I guess I've always loved nature. The first time I pointed out something strange to my mum and got told off when she saw it was when I was about 2.5. I was in my buggy. My mum was pushing me as we were going to the shops, and there was a small patch of trees and grassland beside the road ahead. I pointed and said, look at that little man. And I remember his grumpy mumblings. He looked like we'd say a dwarf in folklore would appear, with his little hat and a knapsack too. He was grumpy and mumbling about being made to clear up, and he wasn't happy. Mum saw him and stood still. She later told me it was the shock, and she always blamed me for making her see it. Well, the grumpy little man then clocked us too. He looked shocked. He said something rude and grumped off down into the grass and disappeared. My mum, when she recovered, said, "Don't ever speak to things like that again." I got told off, but I didn't know why. Of course, it never stopped me. I'd tell my mum what the beings, had told me when I saw them. Sometimes it seemed they were important. There were things that were important about not doing something or having to do something. I mean, I didn't think they were important, but apparently Mum did. And she felt doing certain things encouraged them. And there were other things you could do to ward them off. Though she always told me off if I talked to angel things or fairy folk, because apparently that's not allowed. And I was doing something wrong. But I didn't mind them. Even the strange looking ones. That's just how they were. See, I do believe in things what other folks think are daft. To me, the fae folks are as real as you and I, and don't seem weird in the strangest way to me, as I've always been around them, ever since I can remember. But I've been scared of some of the others, the ones I'd call the lost dead, because quite frankly they're horrific. They often show up with the wounds, that they passed over from, and they're desperate and scary. Yet my mum seems to think they were fine, and we just needed to help them cross on. But no, I never liked seeing them. It scared me so much I try and hide. But that's when my invisible friends came into play. Oh, and yeah, I said it, invisible friends. Now that seems super weird, but to me, as a small child, they seem perfectly normal. Lots of children have imaginary friends, and from a psychological point of view, nowadays it's deemed as healthy. Unfortunately, it wasn't in my family. Mine were called Mr. Bonyface. I loved him so much. He'd tell me stories and make me laugh. But when I asked to describe him, I was told off. He was called Mr. Bonyface because that's what he looked like to me. Baron Samedi, I think he's actually called. But I loved him to bits. And I was always there when I needed him. The other was also a kind of doggo, lol. Seems quite apt now, doesn't it? He was always very calm. Sometimes he'd be the one to say, don't do certain things or stay away from a particular person, etc. He'd advise me, keep me safe. When I was around 7, I saw a photo of him in a book and I showed it to my mum and I got told never to speak to him. His book name was Anubis and I still see him often when something big is going to happen or someone's going to pass. I used to say he was my guard dog, which thinking about it now is probably not very respectful. Now I tend to think of him as my warning system. I did have other invisible friends that weren't humanish like those. One was a huge king cobra snake that knew when people were ill or poorly. I also saw a white hare that liked to tell me about underground, and a leaf man who talked about trees and plants, and a fox, of course, and a kingfisher. Pretty weird, huh? When my family moved to the Orkneys, things upped. I was allowed to be that feral kid who ran around from dawn to dusk. I don't think I ever went home apart from to eat and sleep. But island life suited me, and it seemed that I found folks who listened to what I talked about in regard to weird stuff. I remember going across fields and wandering into farms and talking to old ladies. I was a weird child. They'd ply me with pies and warm milk, and I'd tell them stories that my friends told me about the island and its beings. They in turn told me the names of these things, like selkies and fairy folk. It was part of their culture, their ancestry. It was lovely to actually be part of it, rather than to be told off. But we eventually moved away from my sanctuary there, all the way down to Northamptonshire when I was a teenager. It was a huge shock to me, especially walking on tarmac. It actually hurt my legs well. Luckily, we moved into a small village, but the transition was hard, as it might as well have been a city at that time to me. It was here that my mum became interested in psychic things. I can only think she stopped blaming me for things that happened and thought maybe there was unusual things going on around us after all. One night, my mum and I were in the kitchen. It was late. The blinds were down. She was washing a cup as we were going to have some tea, when we heard this low, rumbling growl that echoed from outside. We froze, looked at each other, without saying words. Did you hear that? Then, before we could open our mouths to say anything, it did it again. This time it was so loud, it must have been right on the other side of the window. It was really, really loud. I went to grab the blind to look, and Mum slapped my hand away. She said, "Don't you dare stare death in the face." To which I laughed. What? And she said, "It shook. He's come to tell us someone's passing." To which I went to open the blinds again, and I wanted to see shook. Again I got a slap and shoved out of the way. Mum was scared. That was the first time I've ever heard of shook. My mum seemed to know what it meant, as the next night my grandpa passed away. He wasn't blood related, but he was from these parts, and I loved him as real family was. Weirdly, when blood passes, we usually hear the wailing scream of a banshee, but not that night. As I reached 15, I wanted to just be like everyone else. No one talked about imaginary friends or seeing weird stuff. I wanted to fit in and be normal. I've always been a tomboy, I guess, and now I felt I wanted to fit in with others. So I started to ignore when things happened. I was fed up with being the weirdo. So although weird things happened, I'd just pretend it didn't. Then when things got awkward, as much as I'd pretend, it just made it worse. And that's when the red-eyed people started to turn up. The lost ones, and they seemed to start shouting at me to notice them and everything, and it got really annoying. So I confided in Mum. I said I wasn't sleeping well, and that the red-haired man who dressed weird wouldn't get out of my room. And the lost ones were now touching me, crying or yelling, and I wanted it to stop. And she said it was my fault for talking to them for years, then said my imaginary friends were evil and demons. She called in some psychic medium, whom I really took a dislike to, but I was told this was because I was having demonic relationships with beings. It was horrible. I didn't like this woman. Although I think she did have some psychic abilities, I believe she was on an ego trip, trying to manipulate my mum. It was awful, and it didn't stop no matter what I argued. I was 15, and no one would see my point of view. So anything I said or did that this woman didn't like was therefore deemed as evil. She told me I was a werewolf. I asked why and was laughing my head off. She said something about me being born in October and my love of the outdoors and my hunting and fishing skills. I was on an island. If you didn't hunt or fish, you didn't eat. Absolutely daft. Then she said that the red-eyed man in old-fashioned clothes was part of that shape-shifting ancestry that I had. So when I argued that was tosh and did that mean my mum was too, I was told off. Obviously, my mum had told this woman things I'd seen and we had experience growing up. She then said I had to recite the Lord's Prayer to banish my imaginary friends. I did as I asked, and then I did. I didn't think a newbie saw Mr. Bonyface would really be bothered by that. Maybe I shouldn't have laughed. So I had to say it again. This crazy lady was all dramatic. I couldn't help but laugh. It was all so silly. But I went through it for my mum. I still say her Catholic face had a lot to answer for. So, of course, after that, I never spoke of anything again. It never changed anything. I just found other ways of dealing with it. When I reached my late 20s, my mum passed away. And out of respect for her, all those years, I've never spoken about things. But I now found a sense of freedom. I didn't care what anyone else said or thought. I actually found other people who talked about strange things like ley lines, etc. I live across the road from my teenage home, and I was talking to someone one day who lives on this road too, and they mentioned that we have a ley line going through our avenue. I love that they spoke so freely about that. They were also the person I confided in when I saw a fawn running across the road. My house backed onto a field with trees and a river's at the bottom, and there's a bit down there called the Devil's Dip. I saw that fawn run. It was as fast as its two legs would carry it. I was so excited. My friend didn't mock me. She just said, the energies have been disturbed lately. Well, you see things like that, don't you? And they don't bother me. I'll be like, yeah, that's unusual, but it's cool. It's almost as if I can explain those things in my heart and mind, that I believe such things exist, so that's okay. And yet, that forest thing, I can't. I can't make sense of it. I've seen things prowling, for want of a better word, across the field by my garden. I didn't like that. I don't know what they were, but they were out there looking or searching for something or someone. They gave me bad vibes, so I refused to acknowledge them. Yet most weird things don't feel like that to me. They usually make me happy or awestruck. They seem familiar, and I like them. If I sit and think about the Dean being, I get confused. You see, when I first saw him, he was all shadowy and crouched down. I was a bit creeped out. I couldn't make it out. But when I did see him fully later, standing there above me, I was awestruck. He was beautiful, but I've never seen anything like him. In my mind, he looked like some kind of deadly but beautiful god, which I know sounds ludicrous. I was almost mesmerised. I really had this intense urge to reach out and touch him. I don't know why. I mean, what part of instinct would make me want to do that? I remember the overwhelming urge to go towards him. If I'd been alone, I probably would have. In that split second of that proper full sight of him, all my fear had gone. I was in awe of how magnificent he looked. I just don't have the words to describe it. He looked brutal, but regal. Primal, yet intelligent. It was a weird paradox. I feel like that image is seared on my brain. And yet, I still think, what was that? After all the things I've seen and experienced, that one moment, that intense feeling has left me with more questions than answers. It wasn't until my husband yelled at me and I stopped staring that fear kicked in again. And I fled like a bat out of hell as it roared. What was it? It looked like a man, a very tall, powerfully built man. It had dark fur or hair, and it didn't have clothes on or was wearing any fabrics. Its ears stood up on its head, and it had a snouty type of face. Yet it seemed humanish. It's very hard to explain. Like something caught between a man and a beast. I swear the eyes were human. I could see its flesh ripple when it moved, and as it breathed, and I saw a muscle clench in its legs. I've been trying to find a photo similar on the internet that explained how he looked, but I haven't so far. But I'll keep trying. You see, I was scared, the most scared I've ever been. But its growl, it was the most god-awful noise I've ever heard, chilling to the bone. But the being didn't look scary. I was fascinated by it. But what scares me is, what if I'd followed my thoughts that day? What if I did reach up for it and touch it? Would I disappear? What did it want? Was I like a rabbit in the headlight? Was I dinner? Why was it so in this dimension, like flesh and blood of this plane? I don't know. I don't know if it was connected to the land. I know I won't ever go back there because it felt personal, as if I was its target, as if it knew me. I can't explain it, but I felt somehow it was connected to me personally. I felt like it had been waiting there for me, that maybe it's still waiting there for me, or there's others like it waiting for me. Lol, Deb. Oh my God, this sounds so crazy. I've just got to laugh at myself. Deb, just tell me I'm bonkers. The other night, when I was in the garden, I said to it, okay, enough's enough. What's this all about, really? If you're real, I want to see you. Why show yourself then? Why scare me? What are you? What do you want? Why are you watching me and then hiding? Are you afraid of me? I was getting a bit ratty, I'll admit it. I just wanted answers. Nothing happened. I just felt like I was being watched. But I didn't care. Well, then we had all the weird stuff going on alongside this. Half of me thinks it's nothing, it's not real. Or maybe it's just some being that's slipping through dimensions somehow. Then I think, but how was it so solid, so real, breathing? It was a predator of some sort, giving its eyes to the front, its powerful build, etc. So what does it eat? You know, people foolish enough to reach out and touch it, possibly. Was that overwhelming feeling I had its lure? Would I just vanished and been its dinner? In all my years, and I'm old now, I hardly ever experienced something that I'd call bad. And is that just me being naive? I've never felt something as ill intentions towards me. Well, except perhaps those seeker things. But most places I've gone, and folks have said about demons and devils, etc., they're usually just land spirits or elementals. Sometimes it's just the lost ones trying to be noticed. Once I had an encounter with a kid that was truly weird, one that made me feel sick and panicked. And that was strange, especially if I found out they are known as black-eyed kids. Or so that was a little creepy along. And I still don't fully understand what it was. But it's one of those things I can shrug off as something weird. Maybe if I knew what they were before I met it might be different. I still don't think the thing in the dream was bad. Not fully. I do wonder if I did something wrong. Did I disrespect its home? I was off trail, acting stupid as usual with my husband. Did it just want me out of its home? Was it protecting something? Didn't it like me and my husband? Were we giving off weird vibes to it? I get the feeling it didn't like my husband. Was that because he stopped me being daft and reaching out for it? Random question now. Do we have shapeshifters in this country, Deb? Is that something people have wrote to you about? Are these beasts, people, or beings something to do with the tales we hear from America of shapeshifters? Are these beings psychic? The seeker, the watcher people I mentioned? I think they were looking for those with abilities. For what ends, I don't know. But they felt wrong. Why would they be on ley lines? Lol. Now, I've written you an epic email. Sorry, Deb. I know you're super busy, my lovely. Don't worry about replying. I'm always welcome your insight and words of wisdom. Tracy Neal, May 2024. At this point, I would like to interject and thank Tracy, obviously, but I'd also like to take the time to answer her questions in regards to beings and whether they're here in the UK. And the short answer to that is yes, there are shape-shifting beings in the UK and all across the world, and how those beings interact with energy. Whatever they are depending on is their agenda. So, like, each and everything on this plane and others is an energy form of some kind, as we are. What we call psychic or sensitive is a natural ability we all have deep within us. Some beings are attracted to our energy for many reasons. It can be that it intrigues them, it feeds them, they fear it or want it, or because we are different to them. We stand out like beacons in the dark for them. They come to be fed, healed, helped, saved, or moved on, or titillated in some way. Some come to guide, assist, and explain, while others come to fear and terrorise. And some come just to watch. As with all living things, there is a give and take, good and bad, negative and positive, and we should expect them all. There is no choosing what sees you. You can only deal with it going forward. Their appearance and description can be horrifying to look at, but they give you no choice in this. It's confusing, and people not experiencing it seem to think abilities come with a cheat sheet, a list of instructions like a kettle or, out of a box. Some experts will tell you they can rid you of it, cure all, for a small fee. Some will use you for their ego, as a psychic did, and others will be truthful and tell you they can offer support, but it's you yourself who has to find a way of handling this. Like loss, grief, heartache, it's an emotion we dread to feel, yet we have to. We have to go through it to come out the other side with a renewed you. We can run from this responsibility our entire lives, but it will not go away until you stand and you face it. Processing hard emotions is shit, is the plainest way that I can put it. Especially while dealing with beings most men would tell you are in your head. You have to do all of this while still functioning as a person who has all the same expectations and responsibilities as everybody else. Let me put a different spin on it for you. You made it through all of this and were strong enough to share it, no matter how hard it was to do. You had these awful events and then stitched yourself back together many times, dusted yourself off, and got on with it. That's why these beings interact with you. It's your strength, your will, your inner fortitude. Even when you're so overwhelmed that you see yourself as the victim. It's like being lost on a failing raft, right, after a shipwreck. Or were you the only one who made it out on that wreck, built that raft, set adrift with no map or no plan, and still made it home alive? There are beings out there that want to enslave, that would use you for themselves. And there are others who fear the power that you have and will do anything they can to weaken and suppress it. You'll have obstacles that seem unsurmountable put in your path, but you'll find a way through. It just takes time and a strong sense of self and a platform to share it from with people who will listen. I recognised Tracy's trauma. It echoes my own. I could have written this account myself. I use words to journal and soothe myself. I used to write poems and stories and anything I could to get it out. I thought that if I could weave a story that would beat the granite man in the bedroom or the witch that taunted me, then I'd overpower them some way and it'd all stop. She also laughs at situations like myself that others would find terrifying, using humour to cope. And there's a reason for that. She's already seen worse. There's nothing on this planet that can terrify her any more than she's already been terrified. The running wild, the being feral as a child brought back so many memories. There's a story in my family about I was about 2.5 and we were in the caravan. And that night, I think I was cold when they put me to bed. So I had my grandmother's cardigan on, like a huge cloak it was. And I got myself up. I had one pigtail in. I couldn't find both of my welly boots, so I just put one on. And I didn't have any other clothing on other than my nana's cardigan. And I went out of the caravan. Can you imagine a toddler at 2.5? I crossed the moor and was stood with the horses. So by the time they found me, like an hour and a half later, there was this massive hue and cry. And I'm just there, happy as a Larry with me GGs, as I used to call them there. Yeah. I remember being 5 and sneaking off the estate and going down to the deer park at Drinkies, and I nearly killed myself in quicksand. I don't even know I got out of there. I had a whole missing time event over that, and I've still not looked at that, regardless of how many people have cancelled. Something went on that day with me, and I don't know what it was. I had the same problem. I come from a family that's Catholic and Protestant. You were told that anything that goes on like this around them are demons. And at the same time, they go to psychic shows and read psychic books and talk about seeing the grandparents in the bedroom and all of this stuff, but don't talk about it outside the house. I didn't know whether I was to be delighted, crazy, or ashamed. It's okay to see ghosts and spirits, But it's not okay to see anything else. It just made no sense to me whatsoever and just made things a million times worse. I felt naughty, inconvenient, in the way, and a problem, to be honest. And I didn't know how to deal with that. I didn't know how to make any of these things go away. I didn't know what was plaguing me. Was it my friend or was it my foe? And I still struggle with that to this day. I've also had the conversation at night on the garden. Yeah, stood on my back step and told him straight, I'm done. Don't scare me anymore. Don't come near my house. Don't scare me pets. Don't scare me children. I'm done. If this was some kind of deal, I'm not having part of it. I'm me and you're you, and you meet me as an equal or you leave me alone. You set boundaries. You tell them what you'll accept and when you'll accept it. And no being should be working you like a battery or a slave. So if you're having interactions 24/7, that's not right. That's not right. It shouldn't be like that. That should not be going on. You should be coming before all of that. You know, it must be really hard, and it is really hard to have all of this going on around you and still have to cope with daily life. And there's no quick fix for that. There's no lesson or course or amount of money you can pay to make all this go away. The answer to that's inside yourself. And I know that's a hard answer, but that's the truth. That's the truth. You know, we need to remember that we are energy beings and our energy changes with age. So when you're a baby, you're not blind. You haven't been shut down. You see things as they are. You see things as the birds and the animals see them. When Tracy talks about the twinkling of the leaves, that's a memory for her, a genetic memory. Toddlers interact with unseen things all the time. They smile at them, giggle at them, frown at them, look confused. That's normal because they're not shut down. And then you get to your teen years. And when I say teens, I don't mean late teens. It really, really amps up from about the age 11 to 15. And that was the age you matured. Energy changes then from childhood energy to adult energy, right? And then you hit the parent age when you kind of put all that on the back because you've got to see to your kids. You've got responsibilities. You've got jobs. Even if you don't have kids, you've got responsibilities. You've got jobs. You've got illnesses. You've got all of the things that go with ordinary life. And then you come to my age, the age of the crone or the sage, where you've got wisdoms. You've got rid of your shackles. You've gone. You don't care what anyone else thinks. And sometimes by my age, you've lost one or two of your parents. And that's like being set adrift. And you learn to navigate all of that. And memory awakes. We remember things. And we need answers. And now's the time for me to get my answers, The fear versus friend. How does that work? When they look like an enemy, but can also be regal. Easy. Ancient beings are primal. They're not humans. They're not guided by society's rules. They have their own rules. And we don't understand that animal presence. And it's in there within us all. Yet if someone hurt your child or your loved one, you'd recognise that beast in you instantly. We are seldom given time or permission to explore that. Freed beings act on instinct, and we act on reason and doubt. Enslaved beings are out there, and they're being worked for others, and yet we can free some of them. So they seek us out, while we run away and avoid the responsibility of that because it seems ridiculous and just too much to comprehend. Yet it is okay to commune with your God, whoever that might be. That's hypocrisy. So why is communing with the ancients wrong? Is God not an ancient? Because that don't make no sense to me. And you know why? Because society fears it, so it should be shunned and ridiculed. Shut in a cupboard and gone. Embrace it. Set clear boundaries. And do the talk on the step. Tell it what you'll accept and what you won't accept. But never do a bargain with it. Never invite it inside. It is better to bear pain or poverty. Yeah, don't take their cure. Never show weakness to a predator. Always approach it as an equal. Tracy asked why did she want to touch it. It's how Tracy processes things. She goes into the woods and she touches and feels and smells and reaches out to new things that she sees, as she clutched that stick as a child. Many of us bring home treasures from the woods and coastlines. We want nature's magic in our home. We want to be able to touch and smell it without even realising it. The best selling scents for us and our homes come from nature. So we want to surround ourselves with them. It's why we garden or have plants at home. We were born to nurture it, to be symbiotic with it, not robotic facsimiles of what we once were. I'm not as brave as Tracy. I didn't want to touch him. But I get the confusion. Was he flesh and blood or from a non-human world? If I could go back without fear to the day my world changed, I too would want to touch him, to see what he would do if I held out my hand. Would I have vanished, never to be seen again? Or would he have responded in kind? I'll never know, as I ran away screaming. If it was easy to navigate, people wouldn't spend millions of pounds a year trying to fix what ails them, what drags at their spirit, what tears them apart. I hope I can help with that, and that I've already helped some of you. The battle goes on with inside you. It's up to you what you'll accept and what you shut down and what you bear. You are in charge of your own ship. Sail it wisely. Until next time, good night, everyone.